In the funeral's bitter wind, my grandfather draped a cashmere blanket over me. "What do you want from this family?" he whispered. I leaned in and said 3 words that made him freeze. They were not, "I love you," but the name of a clause he himself had handwritten and buried in a trust addendum 12 years ago. That blanket signaled an endless winter, right until I pulled the trigger on that clause. My name is Brooklyn Rivera. I am 33 years old and I am a cardiac surgeon at the Northline Cardiac Institute. I spend my days holding human hearts in my hands, pacing them, stitching them, restarting them. I am, by training and by necessity, a specialist in mechanics and failures. This is a useful skill set to have when attending the funeral of your great-grandmother, the matriarch of a family that excised you like a tumor nearly 3 decades ago. The funeral of Ada Whitaker was held in the bitter first winds of winter. The cemetery was private, of course, perched on a hill overlooking the fictional city of Riverton, a city that bore my family's name on half its municipal buildings. The Whitakers were gathered in a tight, dark mass of cashmere and sable. Whitaker Transcontinental, my grandfather's logistics empire, had paid for this hill, this view, this cold. And then there was me. I stood apart near a barren oak. My simple black wool coat, a stark, threadbare insult against their coordinated, custom-tailored mourning. I had not been invited. My presence was a summons I had issued to myself. Every eye had assessed me upon my arrival, the quick, dismissive flick from my father, Graham, who looked straight through me as if I were a particularly uninteresting ghost, the sharp, appraising stare from my Aunt Margot, her mind already calculating the angles, the potential leverage, the threat. The rest of the cousins and distant relations, the ones who had grown up with ponies and trust annuities while I was learning to patch my own jeans, simply looked confused, then vaguely offended, as if I had breached some unspoken protocol, which I had. The protocol was that I did not exist. The service ended. The casket was lowered. The polite, theatrical dabbing of eyes concluded. And then, as the cluster of black coats began to break apart, he moved. Franklin Whitaker, my grandfather, the chairman, the patriarch, the architect of the entire dynasty. He moved like a ship cutting through ice. All other family members parting respectfully to create a wake for him. He was tall, his posture unbent by age, his silver hair perfect. He stopped directly in front of me. The entire cemetery went silent. The only sound the snap of the wind against the canvas tent. He looked at me, his eyes the color of a frozen lake. They held no warmth, no flicker of recognition, just a cold, bottom-line assessment. He was calculating my cost. Then he did the one thing I had not anticipated. He unbuttoned his own heavy cashmere overcoat. Not the blanket. Not yet. That came from the attendant who shadowed him, and he signaled. The attendant, a man in a dark suit, stepped forward, holding a thick, folded blanket of dark grey cashmere. Franklin took it. He stepped closer, invading my personal space, a territory he had never acknowledged. He draped the heavy, impossibly soft blanket over my shoulders. The gesture was public. It was proprietary. It was a claiming. It was a warning. He leaned in. His voice a low, private rumble meant only for me. The scent of expensive cigars and something metallic, like old coins, on his breath. You are back for the money, are you not? It was not a question. It was an accusation, a negotiation, an opening bid. He was offering me a trade, the warmth of this blanket, the re-entry into the family fold, in exchange for my silence, for my compliance. He was offering me a comfortable place to sit while I begged for scraps. I let the weight of the blanket settle. I did not shrug it off. I did not pull it tighter. I simply accepted the weight. I met his gaze. I let a smile, a very thin, very precise smile, touch my lips. It was the kind of smile I reserved for a junior resident who thought they could bluff their way through a diagnosis. I leaned in just as he had, my lips almost brushing the cold shell of his ear, and I whispered 3 words. They were not, I hate you. They were not, I missed you. They were not, how could you? They were 3 words of pure, unadulterated legal precision, the name of a clause, a secret, dusty, an incredibly volatile piece of language buried deep within an addendum to the Whittaker Family Governance Charter. The reaction was immediate and seismic, though to anyone watching from 10 feet away, it was invisible. Franklin Whittaker froze. It was not a dramatic, theatrical gasp. It was a cessation of all systems. His breathing stopped. The hand that had been resting on the blanket on my shoulder clenched, the knuckles white. His face, already pale from the cold, turned a shade of waxy grey. He pulled back, but it was a jerky, uncontrolled movement. His eyes darted for the first time, not with authority, but with fear. He looked around, suddenly terrified of who might have overheard, who might have been close enough to decipher that 3-word atomic bomb. His reaction was the signal flare. Across the small clearing, I saw my father, Graham, stiffen. He had been watching his father's face, not mine. He saw the shift, and his own posture changed from dismissive to alarmed. Beside him, Margot's eyes narrowed into slits. She took a half step forward, her entire body tensing, a predator sensing blood in the water. Only this time, it was the blood of her own father. They both became instantly acutely alert. I stood still, the blanket a heavy shroud on my shoulders. I had not come back to beg, I thought, my voice calm and clear in my own head. I had not come back for money. I had come back to activate. The ripples spread. A young man I did not recognize, dressed in a suit too sharp for a simple mourner, had been standing near the family's security chief. He produced a small leather-bound notebook and a pen. I saw the flash of the silver pen as he began to write, his eyes fixed not on me, but on Franklin, a family lawyer, a note-taker documenting the breach. Simultaneously, 2 men from the family's private security detail, who had been lingering by the line of Blacktown cars, smoothly and silently changed their positions. One moved to stand 10 yards behind me. The other moved to flank the path back to the cars. They were not protecting me, they were containing me. I held my ground. I looked back at my grandfather, who was still struggling to regain his composure. The mask of the patriarch was back in place, but it was cracked. I had seen the wiring underneath. I pulled the blanket just a fraction of an inch tighter, as if chilled, and as I did, I caught the scent. It was not the smell of fresh cashmere. It was the faint, sharp chemical tang of mothballs, of camphor. It was the smell of something that had been kept in long-term storage. The smell of old paper, of files locked in a dark, fireproof safe, the smell of the vault. This blanket was not a spontaneous gesture of kindness. It was a prop taken from storage, brought here for this exact purpose. He had been waiting for me. He had been ready to offer the bribe. He just never, in his most arrogant calculations, expected me to have the bank codes. The question hung in the freezing air, a silent accusation from him to me, and from me back to the world. Why would a respected cardiac surgeon, a woman who had built a life on her own terms, a life dedicated to science and healing, have bothered to learn the obscure, labyrinthine language of corporate trust law? They thought I had come to restart a heart. They were about to find out I had come to stop one. They thought I was a surgeon. They were wrong. I am an archivist. My first entry was logged when I was 5 years old. My mother died. It was fast. A sickness that stole her breath, and then she was just a scent on a pillow that faded. My father, Graham Whittaker, did not mourn. He replaced her. The new wife was installed within 6 months. A woman with a bright, hard smile and a laugh that sounded like chipping glass. She had her own children, 2 perfect, polished miniatures of herself. I did not fit. Graham told me this during what he called a family meeting, held in his vast, oak-paneled study. I was 5. I was sitting on a leather chair so deep my feet stuck straight out. He did not look at me. He looked at the fireplace. "Brooklyn," he said, "this is a new start for us, a fresh family unit, and you do not fit the new dynamic." I did not fit, like a puzzle piece from the wrong box, like a misprint, like an error to be corrected. The correction was swift. I was sent to live with distant relatives. They were so distant. In fact, they were not even relatives, just the descendants of a former business associate of my great-grandfather. They lived 3 states away in a small grey town, where it was always raining. They were not cruel, they were simply paid. I was a transaction. I was given a clean room, 3 meals a day, and an overwhelming, crushing silence. The severing from the Whittaker line was absolute. The phone calls stopped. The invitations to Christmas, to Easter, to the summer compound never began. My existence was reduced to a single annual piece of communication, a birthday card. It was always a generic store-bought card with a landscape on it. Inside, it was never signed, not by Graham, not by Franklin, not by anyone. Just a pre-printed happy birthday. The only clue to its origin was the postage meter stamp from the Whittaker Transcontinental Corporate Mail Room. I was an item on a secretary's annual checklist. I learned to be invisible. I learned to be quiet. I learned to read everything, to watch everyone, to expect nothing. Then, when I was 11 years old, I saw my name in print for the first time. It was in a glossy internal corporate newsletter from Whittaker Transcontinental that my paid guardians received. It was a fluff piece about the Whittaker family's commitment to community. There, on page 3, was a picture. It was a staged photo from a charity drive, a line of smiling executives handing over a comically large check, and in the corner, a small, out-of-focus girl wearing a bright red hat accepting a teddy bear. The caption read, "The Whittaker family's charitable spirit extends to all, including young Brooklyn Rivera, who enjoyed the day's festivities." I was wearing a red hat. I had been at that event, dragged there by my guardians. I had been used as a prop, a nameless, faceless recipient of their staged generosity. My name was suddenly useful to them as a tax-deductible ornament. I was not family, I was a write-off. I tore the page out of the newsletter. I kept it. The second and more pivotal encounter happened 2 years later. I was 13. I was on a supervised school trip, a grim little affair. We had stopped at a rusty, forgotten gas station in the middle of nowhere. I was inside trying to count out change for a bag of chips and a soda. I was short 20 cents. "I will cover that," a voice, old and dry as paper, spoke behind me. I turned. It was a woman, ancient and small, wrapped in a beautiful wool coat. Her eyes were a sharp, surprising blue. She looked at me, not like a child, but like a specimen. She nodded to the clerk, paid for my snack and her own gas, and then walked out. I followed her, confused. She was sitting in the passenger seat of an old, meticulously maintained sedan. She rolled down the window. "You are Graham's girl," she said. It was not a question. I just stared. It was Ada, my great-grandmother, the matriarch. I had not seen her since I was 4. She looked at me for a long, silent moment. She did not smile. She did not offer a hug or a kind word. She just assessed me. Then she reached into a leather bag at her feet and pulled out a small, dark object. "He does not like to be reminded of things that do not fit," she said. She did not need to say who he was. She handed the object to me. It was a small, bound notebook, the leather soft and expensive. Tucked inside the cover was a folded piece of paper. You write down the things the adults do not want to remember, she said. Dates, times, promises. When you write it down, it is real. It does not matter if they forget. The paper remembers. Then she rolled up the window, and the car drove away. I opened the note. It was her handwriting, shaky but fierce. Do not let them erase you. That notebook became my Bible. It was not a diary for my feelings, my teenage angst, my loneliness. I had no use for that. It was a logbook. It was a ledger. I wrote down the date of the newsletter. I taped the clipping inside. I wrote down the date and time of every unanswered phone call to my father's office. I logged the date of the anonymous birthday card. I logged the names of the cousins whose lavish parties I saw in the Riverton Society pages, cross-referencing the dates with the silence from my own family. I wrote down every broken promise, every casual slight, every single instance where I was meant to feel like nothing. My life became a catalogue of their failures. When it came time to choose a path, the lack of family made it simple. I did not have a trust fund to fall back on. I did not have a network of connections to ease my way. I had only my own mind and a discipline forged in that cold, silent house. I chose medicine. I chose it because it was difficult. I chose it because it was precise. In my world, a decimal point in the wrong place could kill someone. In their world, entire lives could be misplaced with no consequence. I preferred the rigor of mine. I worked. I stripped my life down to the studs. I worked in the cafeteria to pay for my textbooks. I won scholarships, not by charm, but by brutal, relentless academic force. I graduated top of my class. I got into med school. I worked nights as an orderly. I slept 4 hours a night. I did not date. I did not socialize. I studied. I built my life brick by painful brick with my own hands. I did not ask them for a single cent. Then, during my residency, I saved a man's life. It was a chaotic night in the emergency room. A man had been brought in from a multi-car pileup. He was not the most critical case on the surface, but something was wrong. His stats were fluctuating wildly. The attending was ready to discharge him. I fought it. I insisted on a full cardiac workup. I found it, a massive pulmonary embolism, a silent killer ticking away. His name was Arthur. He was a truck driver, a lifer. When he was stable, days later, he asked to see me. He was a simple, decent man, and he grabbed my hand. His was rough as sandpaper. Doctor, he said, his voice thick. They told me you saved me. The other guy was sending me home in a box. I owe you. I mean it. Anything ever. You find me. I smiled. I told him to just focus on his recovery. It was my job. Years passed. I became Dr. Rivera, the promising cardiac surgeon at Northline. And then, one day, I heard a name through a colleague who had a patient at the Whitaker Transcontinental Executive Wing. The name of Franklin Whitaker's new, highly trusted personal driver, the man who was with him 24 hours a day. Arthur. The seed of revenge is not a simple thing. It is not a moment of anger. It is a lifetime of careful, patient cultivation. It nurtures in the dark. It feeds on small, cold facts. I had built a life. I had a name, a career, a purpose. I did not need their money. I did not need their approval. But that logbook, that leather-bound ledger Ada had given me, was full, and I had come to understand a fundamental truth. The Whitakers lived on a currency of narrative, of excuses, of carefully curated public images and conveniently forgotten facts. I lived on a currency of proof. My life, the one I had built myself, was evidence. The logbook was evidence. And I had just learned that I had a witness on the inside. I finally understood what Ada meant. A life documented is stronger than a dynasty's denials. The paper always remembers. The death of Ada Whittaker, at the age of 97, was the starting gun. It was not a sad event for me. It was a logistical one. Her passing did not just remove the family's symbolic matriarch. It triggered the reading of her will and, with it, the unsealing of certain trust provisions. And with that, the whispers began. I did not hear them from the family, I heard them from the periphery. I heard them from a former law clerk I knew from a pro bono case, a man who now worked in a trust and estates department that occasionally brushed up against Whittaker Holdings. He mentioned over a bad hospital cafeteria coffee that there were rumblings about the Whittaker estate. Nothing concrete, just the kind of expensive static that happens when billions of dollars are about to shift. He mentioned a phrase he had heard a senior partner mutter in frustration. The family governance charter. It was a nothing term, a piece of corporate jargon. But I was an archivist. I filed it away. My research was not like a lawyer's, it was like a surgeon's. I was looking for an anomaly, a variation in the code. I did not start with the Whittaker legal team. I would find nothing there but a wall of privilege. I started at the Riverton University Law Library, in the special collections, under the guise of researching philanthropic endowments. The Whittaker family had donated this wing of the library. Their arrogance was their vulnerability. They loved to see their name carved into stone, their legacy documented. And in that documentation, in a dusty, forgotten box of donor files, I found a series of guest lectures from 20 years prior. One was a transcript from the family's former chief counsel, a man long dead. He spoke on the modern architecture of dynastic trusts. Tucked into the back of the bound transcript was an addendum, a copy of a student's notes, or perhaps a clerk's. It was an anonymous annotation, a breakdown of the lecture, and at the bottom of the last page, a handwritten note, almost an afterthought in blue ink. See also WTC Addendum F. Private charter, highly irregular, potentially punitive. WTC. Whittaker Transcontinental. F. Franklin Whittaker. Delta. The Greek letter for change. It was a breadcrumb, but it was the right breadcrumb. I spent the next 6 months of my nights, after 16-hour shifts, cross-referencing that single symbol. I used legal databases searching for Delta in conjunction with Whittaker in obscure probate journals. Finally, I found it, not the document itself, but a legal analysis of it in a peer-reviewed law review article about adverse clauses in hereditary trusts. The article was so academic, so dense, it was effectively invisible. The author, without naming the family, described a unique and draconian provision. The article referred to it by its activation phrase, the 3 words I had whispered in my grandfather's ear, Clause Delta Invocation. The clause was a masterpiece of my grandfather's paranoia. It was his own internal check and balance, a weapon designed to keep his own vicious, greedy children from tearing the empire apart. It stated in cold, clear terms that if any designated beneficiary of the primary Whittaker Trust was found to have used coercion, isolation, or targeted defamation against another designated beneficiary, with the intent of securing or influencing a financial distribution, a chain reaction would occur. The moment the clause was invoked by the aggrieved party, and a preliminary burden of proof met, the entire distributive function of the Whittaker Family Trust would be frozen. All allowances, all stipends, all corporate dividends, all payments to Graham, to Margot, and even to Franklin himself would stop. They would be frozen for 18 months. During that time, the entirety of the frozen funds would be rerouted and held by the Ada Charitable Fund, my great-grandmother's personal independent philanthropy. It was a holding pattern, a corporate timeout, and during those 18 months, an independent court-appointed arbitrator would be brought in to conduct a full audit and rule on the validity of the claim. It was, in short, a mutually assured destruction clause. Franklin had built a bomb in his own basement, assuming no one would ever be desperate or foolish enough to use it. But he had added one critical, fatal activation key. He was a businessman, not a psychologist. He did not trust feelings. The clause could not be activated by someone claiming their feelings were hurt. It could not be triggered because my father failed to call me on my birthday. The addendum was only valid. The article specified if the aggression had the scent of money, it required proof of financial expenditure, strange wire transfers, payments to private investigators, contracts with public relations firms, the hiring of medical experts for the purpose of discrediting a target. The evidence had to be a receipt. I stared at that phrase, hiring of medical experts, targeted defamation. He had not just written a clause. He had written a prophecy. He had described the exact tools my family would use against me. And he had given me the antidote. I closed the journal. I was a surgeon. But now I needed a lawyer. Mara Quinn was not a family lawyer, she was a probate litigator. She was the person wealthy families hired when one branch wanted to legally annihilate another. Her reputation in Riverton was terrifying and pristine. She was known for her meticulousness. She was known for meticulously dismantling estates, finding leverage in misplaced commas, and charging astronomical fees. I met her in her office, a minimalist glass box high over the city. I did not bring my feelings. I did not bring my childhood logbook. I brought the law review article. I brought a one-page summary of my hypothesis. She read it. She looked up at me over her glasses, her eyes sharp. This is theoretical, Dr. Rivera. I believe it is not, I said. To even get a foot in the door, you would need the original signed addendum. A law review article is academic gossip. I have a theory on that as well. This is the delicate part. I called Arthur, the man who owed me his life, the man who now spent his days driving my grandfather. It took 3 calls. The first 2, he hung up, terrified. On the third, I just said one thing, Arthur, it's Dr. Rivera. I am not asking you to steal. I am not asking you to lie. I am asking you to tell me if I am wrong. A simple yes or no is all I need. I will never call you again. I met him at an all-night diner at 2 in the morning, on his one night off. He looked 10 years older, the stress of living in the Whitaker orbit having worn him down. You should not have come, he said, not looking at me. Does it exist, Arthur? A handwritten addendum. Something called Delta. He drank his coffee. He was shaking. He calls it the winter clause, Arthur mumbled. He wrote it himself years ago, after a bad fight with Ms. Margot. He keeps it. He keeps it separate from the other papers. Where? He closed his eyes. He was paying his debt. The lodge. The hunting lodge at Frost Pines. There is a floor safe in the gun room. It is the only place he trusts. He hand-signed it. I saw it once when he was checking inventory, sealed with his personal wax seal. A handwritten, signed addendum, sealed in a safe. It was real. Thank you, Arthur, I said. He just nodded, got up, and walked out, leaving his debt paid in full. I went back to Mara Quinn. It exists, I said. And I know where it is. Mara's eyes lit up. That is the where. Now, we need the why. We need the scent of money. We need the receipts. This I could not do. My skills were in arteries, not data. I have someone for that, too, I said. Riley Park was a data journalist. She was young, she was hungry, and she was a digital bloodhound. She specialized in tracing dark money in politics, but she was happy to turn her skills on a private dynasty. I paid her from my own savings. I gave her one directive. I need you to trace every dollar of discretionary spending from the Whittaker Transcontinental corporate accounts and the Whittaker Family Trust. I am not looking for yachts. I am looking for payments that have no business purpose. Payments to consultants, PR firms, strategic advisors, specifically trace any payments to anyone in the medical field that is not a known hospital. Riley grinned. I love hunting whales, she said. It took 2 weeks. The first hit was almost too perfect. Riley found an invoice paid from the family trust to a consulting neurologist in another state. It was for $5,000. The line item was archival review and cognitive assessment. I knew the name. He was not just any neurologist, he was a talking head, a friendly expert known for providing convenient diagnoses for difficult family members in high-stakes divorces. And as I quickly discovered, he was on the board of a small private hospital where my Aunt Margot had recently made a very large, very public donation. They were building a case. They were preparing to paint me as unstable, as cognitively impaired, as delusional. This is it, I told Mara. It is good, she said. It is the scent, but it is not the animal. This is a $5,000 invoice. We need the predator. We need the big, undeniable expenditure. Riley found it 3 days later. Got it, was all the email said. The attachment was a series of invoices. They were from a high-priced boutique media firm in Washington, D.C. called North Peak Strategies. The kind of firm with no website, no client list, and an unlisted address. The kind of firm that specialized in reputational management and opposition narrative. The payments were not small. They were monthly, $50,000, $100,000. The recipient line was vague, strategic counsel, but the memo line on the last, most recent transfer was not vague. The accounts payable clerk who processed it must have been sloppy, or maybe, just for a second, honest. The memo line, paid directly from the Whittaker Family Trust account, read, Engagement, Gold Digger Narrative. I looked at the invoice. I looked at the routing number. It was the scent of money. It was not just a scent. It was a blood trail leading directly from the family vault to a public relations firm hired to do one thing, destroy me. They were using family money to prove I was a gold digger. I printed the invoice. I put it with the law review article. I put it with the notes on Dr. Vane. I put it with the date of Arthur's confirmation. My logbook was no longer a diary of the past, it was an affidavit waiting to be filed. I did not return to Riverton. I had never truly left, I simply re-entered its orbit, a satellite they had tried to fling into deep space, now correcting its course. I took a temporary leave of absence from Northline, citing a family matter. The irony was delicious. I did not go to the Whittaker estate. I did not check into a hotel under their name. I took a small, sterile, monthly rental apartment in a nondescript building downtown under my own name, Dr. Rivera. I made myself visible. I went to the grocery store. I sat in a coffee shop. I let the whispers start. I was presenting myself as a target in surgery. This is called exposing the field. You cannot operate on what you cannot see. The blanket Franklin had given me at the funeral was folded in a bag in the trunk of my car. I had not discarded it. It was evidence. It was the physical representation of their first offer, warmth in exchange for silence. My noncommittal acceptance of it, just standing there, letting it rest on my shoulders, had been my response. I did not deny their offer, nor did I accept it. I had, in effect, left the negotiation table open. They were terrified of what I might ask for. They were also, I knew, preparing to destroy me if I asked for too much. My father, Graham, was the first to blink. He did not call. He sent a text message, as if I were a new employee. Should we meet? Coffee 10 a.m. The bistro at the Arnium. The Arnium, a private club, all dark wood and old money, where he knew I would be uncomfortable. I agreed. He was already seated, a cup of untouched cappuccino in front of him. He looked smaller than I remembered. His suit was expensive, but his posture was weak. Brooklyn, he said, as if we had spoken last week. This is all unfortunate. Your timing. The timing of Ada's death. I asked, my voice neutral, clinical. He waved that away. No, your re-emergence. It is creating complications. He leaned forward, attempting a fatherly, confidential tone that sat on him like a borrowed coat. Look, I know things, they were not ideal. Your mother. Well, it was a long time ago. But I have other responsibilities now. You have a half-sister. You know, Celeste. She's at Yale getting her PhD. I am aware, I said. It is expensive, he said, sighing. Incredibly. I am paying for her entire doctoral tuition, and her apartment and her stipend. So, you see. I watched him. He was not speaking, he was leaking. So, you see, he continued, my resources are allocated. I am taking care of my family. I am doing the right thing. So if you are here looking for a similar arrangement, a slip, a critical diagnostic slip. He was not just my father, he was a co-beneficiary. He was worried I was here to cut into his piece of the pie, and he had just confessed on tape that he viewed his children's educations as a line item, an arrangement that could be horse-rated. The digital recorder in my pocket was capturing every word. I am not here for tuition, Graham, I said, standing up. Thank you for the coffee. His panicked, confused look was satisfying. I had not made a demand. I had simply forced his hand, and he had shown me his cards. The next attack came from Margot. It was, as always with her, less direct and infinitely more venomous. The rumor started on a Tuesday. It was subtle, just a whisper that reached the ears of a former colleague at Riverton General. Is Brooklyn all right? I heard she had to leave Northline. Something about financial trouble. By Thursday, the rumor had evolved. Riley Park, my data journalist, picked it up on a private message board for local medical professionals. The story was now that I, Dr. Brooklyn Rivera, was under internal review at Northline Cardiac Institute for financial improprieties, that I was drowning in debt from a failed private venture. It was brilliant. It was targeted. It was the gold digger narrative from the North Peak invoice given a professional medical spin. It was designed to do two things: discredit my professional reputation, making me look unstable and desperate, and simultaneously provide a motive for my sudden return. She's back because she's broke. Riley, however, did not deal in rumors. She dealt in data. They are good, Riley texted me. But they are not clean. While Margot's rumor was spreading, Riley was already fact-checking it in reverse. She did not just deny it, she annihilated it. She quietly fed a counter-narrative to a legal affairs blogger she knew. She did not use my name. She simply provided proof, my unblemished, fully paid-in-full medical school loan records, which I had authorized her to access. She provided the public record incorporation data for my small, one-time investment in a friend's biotech startup, an investment that had actually turned a modest profit 2 years ago. The blogger, smelling a David versus Goliath story, ran with it. Whisper campaign targets respected surgeon, a case of financial fake news. The rumor died. Stillborn within 24 hours. More importantly, Margot had shown her hand. She had deployed a financial weapon. She had taken a shot, and I had logged it. My phone was now my logbook. Ada's 2.0. Every text from Graham, every screenshot of the rumor boards, every time-stamped call from Mara Quinn, every encrypted file from Riley. It was no longer a child's ledger of hurt. It was a prosecutor's file. The evening the counter-story ran, I got the call I was waiting for. It was from a burner number. Doctor, my heart, for the first time, actually beat faster. Arthur, are you safe? Do not have long, he whispered, his voice strained. He is agitated. Mr. Franklin, ever since the funeral, and Miss Margot, she was in his study all afternoon shouting. Now they are planning this Friday. Friday night. What is happening Friday night? They are going to the lodge. Frost Pines. Mr. Franklin, Miss Margot, and a lawyer I do not know, a new advisor from out of state. They are opening the safe. He said he needed to review and amend the lodge files. Review and amend. That was it. They were not just hiding it. They were going to destroy it or change it or produce a new official version that neutered the Delta clause. He's moving, I said. This Friday, Frost Pines. Mara was silent for a second. When she spoke, her voice was pure steel. Then we move now. An ex-party petition. We will be in front of a judge by morning. We are not accusing them of anything. We are simply, as a potential and concerned beneficiary, asking for a temporary order to preserve all testamentary documents pending a full inventory due to the patriarch's advanced age and potential undue influence from other family members. Undue influence, I repeated. That's polite. It is the legal equivalent of a tactical missile. Doctor, Mara said, it gives the judge a non-committal reason to say pause, and it gives us time. I will file it by 8 a.m. While Mara prepared the legal strike, I prepared the strategic one. I knew Franklin. A court order would infuriate him, but it would also look to him like a move of simple greed. He would fight it. I needed to show him I was not just another scavenger, I was a strategist. I assembled the data. Riley's financial flow charts, the money trail, Trust Account 7B, North Peak Strategies, the Family Trust, Dr. Elias Vane, the memo line, Rivera engagement. I printed it all. I put it in a clean black leather portfolio. It was not an accusation, it was a diagnostic report. Then I made a call to Franklin's personal assistant. This is Dr. Brooklyn Rivera, I said. I would like to schedule a meeting with my grandfather, not at the estate. I would like to meet him at the Whitaker Transportation Museum. Thursday, 4 p.m. The museum was his cathedral, a monument to the family's industrial power. And critically, it was the home of the original Whitaker Charter, not the governance charter, but the 19th century founding document from the first Whitaker, a document Ada had insisted be displayed publicly. Its key phrase, carved in bronze under the display, was integrity in all things. My message was clear. I wanted to meet him at the altar of his own professed legacy. I wanted to compare the spirit of that original charter to the data in my portfolio. He agreed, via his assistant. The meeting was set. Mara's petition was filed. The judge, seeing the Whitaker name and smelling a billion-dollar fight, granted the temporary order. All documents were to be preserved, untouched, pending a hearing. We had stopped the Friday night shredding party, but I still needed the final piece. Mara's order was a shield. I needed a sword. I needed indisputable proof that the document was his, that his hand had signed it, that his mind had conceived it. It came on Wednesday night, the night before my meeting at the museum. It was an email sent to a new encrypted account I had set up. The sender was anonymous. The subject line was blank. There was only one attachment. It was a photograph, not a scan, a photograph taken at a low angle, as if from a phone left on a desk. It showed a dark, wood-paneled room. It showed a desk. It showed a heavy cream-colored piece of paper, and it showed a hand, Franklin's hand. The hand was holding a vintage fountain pen, the one he always used. It was poised over the signature line of a document. The document was titled in clear, bold type, Addendum. But that was not the proof. The proof was the thumb. Franklin's left thumb, the one he had nearly severed in a childhood accident on a conveyor belt, an accident that became part of the family lore of his toughness. The scar was deep, a pale, crescent-shaped ridge that ran across the entire joint. The photo was a perfect, high-resolution shot of that unmistakable scarred thumb resting right beside the signature line. It was a fingerprint. It was a biometric seal. It was a 1 in a billion identification. It was not just a document, it was his. The trap was set. The evidence was compiled, and now I had the signature and the scar to prove it. The Whitaker Transportation Museum was not a public space. It was a cathedral of commerce, a monument Franklin had built to his own origin story. The ceilings were high enough to swallow empires, and the air was cold, smelling of polished granite and preserved oil. Gleaming black locomotives, the titans of the 19th century, sat silent on their tracks, perfectly lit. We were surrounded by the dead, heavy armor of industry. I stood by the central exhibit. It was not a train. It was a document displayed like a holy relic, the original 1888 Whitaker Charter. A single page of vellum that had launched a dynasty. Beneath it, etched in bronze, was the family motto, the one Ada had insisted upon, integrity in all things. I arrived at 4 p.m. exactly. They arrived at 4:03, Franklin, Graham, and Margot. They were flanked by two men I did not recognize, both in identical, dark, expensive suits, their lawyers. This was not a reconciliation, it was a deposition. The museum had been cleared, of course. The vast, echoing hall was ours alone. Franklin bypassed the charter. He walked to the massive, suspended iron drive shaft of a long-dead engine. He rested one hand on the cold steel. This is what built this family, Brooklyn, he said, his voice resonating in the huge space. Gears, power, forward, momentum. Sentiment does not move freight. He turned, his gaze dismissive of the room, fixing on me. I understand you have filed a frivolous petition with the probate court. It is an annoyance. It is a gesture of a child demanding attention. He walked toward me. So, let us stop the theater. Tell me what you want. He thought he knew. He thought this was the negotiation he had prepared for at the funeral. I assume you do not want a blanket this time, he said, a flicker of a smile playing on his lips. What is it? A seat. Is that what this is about? You want a seat on the board. The philanthropy wing. A hospital endowment in your name. A check with 7 zeros. Name it. Let us get this done. I kept my hands clasped loosely in front of me. I do not want a seat, Franklin. I walked back to the 1888 charter, to the bronze plaque. I am here for this, I said, tapping the glass above the word integrity. I am here to invoke the arbitration clause specified in Addendum Delta. Margot, who had been watching me like a hawk, let out a sharp, ugly bark of a laugh. Addendum Delta. Are you serious? She looked at the lawyers, sharing her amusement. That is a ghost story. It is a myth. It is a fairy tale father told us to scare us when we were children. It does not exist. She sneered at me, her confidence absolute. You came back after all these years with a ghost story. God, you really are desperate. You are your mother's daughter. It is not a story, I said. I opened the black leather portfolio I had placed on the exhibit rail. I had not come with feelings, I had come with exhibits. This, I said, is a metadata authentication report prepared by Riley Park, a certified data forensics expert. I turned the first page. There it was, a high-resolution 8 by 10 print of the anonymous photograph, the hand, the pen, the document, and the scar. This photograph, I said, my voice as calm as if I were presenting rounds, was taken at 12:04 p.m., 12 years ago, on a device that was, for a period of 2 minutes and 14 seconds, connected to the internal guest Wi-Fi network at the Frost Pines Lodge. The metadata confirms the GPS coordinates of the lodge and the exact timestamp. This report, I tap the page, authenticates the data. Ms. Park is prepared to testify to its validity. I slid the report onto the glass display case right next to the 1888 charter. The lawyers leaned in. Their professional curiosity piqued. Graham squinted. Confused. Margot stopped laughing, but I never took my eyes off Franklin. He did not look at the report. He did not need to. He looked at his own left hand, which he had resting on the railing. He instinctively, unconsciously flexed his thumb, the one with the pale, crescent-shaped ridge that ran across the joint. He knew what I had. His face did not change, but the color, the vibrant, powerful blood that always colored his skin, drained away. He knew I had the one thing that could prove the document was not a fabrication. He knew I had his scar. Graham, sensing his father's sudden, inexplicable weakness, did what he always does. He attacked. He blustered. This is a fabrication, a lie, he almost shouted, his voice cracking and echoing off the iron. She is the one. She is the one who is isolating us. She is the one who cut me out of her life. Years ago, she never called. She never once reached out. She is the one who violated the family, not us. This is extortion. I let his voice fade, the echoes dying against a wall of preserved steel. I reached into my pocket. I pulled out the small, silver digital audio recorder, not a phone, a professional-grade recorder. I pressed the play button. The air, the vast, cold, silent air of the museum, filled with my father's voice. I have other responsibilities now. You have a half-sister. You know, Celeste. She is at Yale. Graham froze. I am paying for her entire doctoral tuition, and her apartment and her stipend. So, you see, my resources are allocated. I am taking care of my family. His face went from red to a sickly, mottled white. So if you are here looking for a similar arrangement. I pressed stop. The silence that followed was heavier and colder than any of the engines. He had, in his own words, confirmed the exact behavior the clause was designed to punish. He had admitted to viewing the trust as a personal resource to be allocated. He had admitted to attempting to buy me off with a similar arrangement to silence me. I looked at Franklin. His eyes were closed. For the first time in his life, he looked defeated. I walked to the simple cloth bag I had set by my feet. I reached inside and pulled out the heavy, dark gray cashmere blanket, the one from the funeral, the one that still smelled faintly of camphor, and a century of locked vaults. I did not throw it at him. I folded it. Neat, precise, clinical. I walked to the display case, the one that now held the 1888 charter. The photograph of his hand and the audio recorder. I placed the folded blanket on the glass, completing my exhibit. You offered me warmth, I said, my voice quiet, but it cut through the hall. You offered me a bribe wrapped in cashmere to stay silent. I am returning it. I looked at him. I am not here for warmth. I am here for the rules. I am offering you the standardized procedure you yourself wrote. I leaned in, just as I had at the funeral. I did not need to whisper, but I did. I made sure he, and only he, heard the words clearly, like a diagnosis being delivered, clause. Delta. Invocation. Franklin Whitaker's eyes snapped open. He looked at the blanket. He looked at the photo of his thumb. He looked at his son, frozen in humiliation. He did not say a word to me. He turned to his lawyers, his voice a low, vicious command, "Stop this now. The meeting is over." It was like a switch had been thrown. The two lawyers snapped into action. One was already on his phone, his hand to his ear, walking quickly toward the exit, his voice low and urgent, "Kill the hearing. I want a motion to dismiss the preservation order. I do not care. File it now." The other lawyer stepped in front of me. A physical barrier. "Dr. Rivera. This meeting is concluded. Any and all future communication will be through our firm." They were moving. They were scrambling. They were trying to contain the breach, to stitch the wound. But they were too late. As Franklin, flanked by his son, his daughter, and his frantic legal team, swept out of the museum, their momentum broken, my own phone vibrated in my pocket. I did not look at it until I was alone in the vast, echoing hall, alone with the ghosts of engines and the evidence of my family's decay. It was a text from Mara Quinn. It was a single sentence, filed. "It is on the docket. 10:04 a.m. Welcome to the war." As their lawyers were calling to stop the hearing on the preservation order, my lawyer was already at the probate court at that very moment, filing the actual petition. The petition to invoke, the petition that officially triggered the clause, the petition that had, as exhibits, the North Peak Strategies invoices, the gold digger narrative, the consulting neurologist, the wire transfers, the scent of money. The bell had been rung. The 18-month clock had just started. The emergency hearing was not held in one of the grand, wood-paneled probate courts. We were in chambers, a small, pressurized, and brutally modern room. There was no gallery, just the parties and their counsel. It was sterile, smelling of industrial carpet cleaner, and hot photocopiers. Judge Davis Mayers was a woman in her late 50s, with a sharp, intelligent face that suggested she had absolutely no patience for theatricality. She looked at the Whitaker legal team, all four of them, led by a man named Bellows, who looked like he had been sculpted from expensive granite. Then she looked at Mara, and at me. "Ms. Quinn," the judge began, her voice flat. "I have read your emergency petition to invoke. I have also read the 30 pages of absolute denial from opposing counsel. You are alleging that a private family governance charter, which you have not provided in its original signed form, has been breached. You are asking this court to freeze one of the largest private trusts in this state based on a law review article and a photograph of a man's thumb." Bellows, the Whitaker's lead lawyer, almost smiled. Franklin, sitting at the table, looked bored and offended, as if he had been called in for a traffic ticket. Margot vibrated with contained rage. Graham just looked terrified. "Your Honor," Mara said, standing. She was the picture of calm. "The addendum is designed, by its own terms, to be invisible until its specific activation keys are used. We are not here today to prove the final case. We are here, as the clause itself stipulates, to provide sufficient preliminary evidence of a financially backed campaign of defamation to trigger the arbitration and the subsequent 18-month freeze. The clause does not require the original document at this stage. It requires, and I quote, the scent of money. Then show me the money, Judge Davis Mayers said, leaning back. Show me the flow. This was the cue. Mara nodded to Riley Park, who was seated at our small adjoining table. Riley was not a lawyer, she was a data expert, and she had been sworn in as such. She connected her laptop to the court's monitors. Your Honor, Riley said, her voice clear and precise. What you are seeing is a simplified flowchart of expenditures from the Whitaker Family Trust, specifically the discretionary fund designated 7B, over the last 18 months. The chart was brutal. A large box labeled Whitaker Trust 7B was at the top. From it, a thick red line led to a box labeled North Peak Strategies DC LLC. North Peak Strategies, Riley continued, is a reputation management firm. We have traced a total of 4 payments totaling $275,000 from the trust to this firm. I draw your attention to Exhibit B. A new image filled the screen. It was the internal approval memo for the final wire transfer. The memo line, which we had highlighted, read, Rivera Engagement, Gold Digger Narrative. Bellows shot to his feet. Objection. This is a privileged internal document. Your Honor, it was almost certainly obtained illegally. Fruit of the poisonous tree. The document was obtained legally, Your Honor, Riley said calmly. Through a metadata search of public-facing, unsecured server data associated with the Whitaker corporate network. They failed to encrypt their outgoing payment memos. It is not privileged, it is simply sloppy. The judge stared at the memo line, then back at Bellows. Sloppy indeed. Counsel, sit down. Continue, MS. Park, the judge said, her gaze unwavering. The second floor. Riley switched the slide. Your Honor, Riley said, switching the slide. A smaller, but more specific line of payments from the same trust fund, routed through a shell holding owned by Ms. Margot Whitaker to a private consultant. The box appeared, Dr. Elias Vane, Neurological Consulting. The invoices totaled $15,000 for archival review and cognitive assessment. We subpoenaed Dr. Vane's preliminary report, Mara said, picking up the thread. In it, he concludes, without ever having met or spoken to my client, that Dr. Rivera shows signs of financial desperation and delusional personality traits consistent with a litigious paranoid fixation. His archival review consisted entirely of the media package fed to him by North Peak Strategies. Mara turned to me. Dr. Rivera, have you ever met Dr. Elias Vane? No, I said, my voice clear in the small room. I have never spoken to him. He has never examined me. He has never had access to my medical records. They were building a case, Your Honor, Mara concluded. Using trust funds to hire a medical expert to declare my client mentally unstable, and a PR firm to paint her as a gold digger. This is the definition of a financially backed campaign of defamation. This is the scent of money. The judge was silent. She looked at the chart. She looked at Franklin. Mr. Bellows, your response. Bellows stood, smoothing his tie. He was not ruffled. This was his arena. An interesting theory, Your Honor. A lot of charts, a lot of smoke. But what Miss Quinn conveniently ignores is the single, fatal flaw in her entire argument, the document itself. He held up a hand. Let us, for the sake of argument, pretend this addendum delta even exists. Let us pretend it is not just a draft, or a bit of familial folklore. As Ms. Whitaker testified in her affidavit, he paced. Where is it? They have not produced it. They have produced a blurry photograph of my client's hand. And even if they could produce it, what is it? It is a piece of paper. It is not a will. It is not a covenant. It was not signed under duress, perhaps, but it was also not signed with any legal standing. It was not witnessed by an attorney. It was not notarized. It is, at best, a memorandum of my client's private wishes, with no more legal power than a grocery list. You cannot freeze $1 billion trust based on an unnotarized note. It was a brilliant counter. He had conceded the small facts, the payments, the picture, to attack the very foundation. The addendum was legally invalid. I felt the air go out of the room. I looked at Mara. She was smiling. Mr. Bellows is, for once, absolutely correct, Mara said, shocking everyone. The addendum was not notarized. That is a fact. Bellows' smile widened. Margot looked smug. My client, Mr. Franklin Whitaker, Mara continued, was and is a man deeply concerned with privacy. He did not want a public notary involved in his most sensitive family planning. He did not, however, fail to have the signing attested to. She placed a new document on the projector. Exhibit D. A letter from the personal files of Mr. Alastair Finch, the Whitaker chief counsel from that time, who, as Mr. Bellows knows, is deceased. Bellows was on his feet again. Objection, hearsay. The man is dead. It is a business record, Your Honor, and it is foundational, Mara said. Mr. Finch, in this memo to his own files, documents his client's actions on that day. If I may read it. The judge nodded. Mara read the memo for the file, date, October 3, 12 years ago. Ref. Addendum. Client signed the addendum in my presence today, at the Frost Pines Lodge. Client specifically refused notarization, insisting on 2 private witnesses, whom he trusted, to attest to his full capacity and intent. The 2 witnesses who signed the attestation page were, 1, Mrs. Ada Whitaker, his mother, and 2, Mr. Elias Thorne, the lodge manager. The room was utterly silent. Mrs. Ada Whitaker is sadly deceased, Mara said. And Mr. Finch is deceased, but Mr. Elias Thorne, the lodge manager, is very much alive. The prosecution calls Mr. Thorne. It was the most beautiful piece of legal theatre I had ever seen. The door opened, and Elias Thorne, the lodge manager, a man in his late 70s with a terrified, dignified face, was sworn in. Margot looked like she had seen a ghost. Franklin was staring at his lawyer, his eyes slits of pure ice. He had been betrayed, not by me, but by his own long-dead lawyer's meticulous record-keeping. Mara was gentle. Mr. Thorne, you were the manager at Frost Pines Lodge for 30 years, correct? Yes, Do you recall the meeting Mr. Finch just described, 12 years ago, in the gun room? I do, he said, his voice quiet. I was asked to witness, with Mrs. Ada, the old matriarch. And did you watch Mr. Franklin Whitaker sign the document, the one called Addendum Delta? I did. He signed it with his own pen, the fancy one. And then Mrs. Ada signed as a witness, and I signed as a witness on a separate page, an attestation page, Mr. Finch called it. And did Mr. Whitaker say anything? Mara asked. Did he explain what he was signing? Bellows shot up. Objection, hearsay. It goes to the client's intent, Your Honor, Mara countered, which is the entire basis of this document. Overruled, the judge snapped. Answer the question, Mr. Thorne. Elias Thorne looked at Franklin Whitaker, his former employer, the most powerful man he had ever known. He took a deep breath. He was angry that day, Thorne said. He had just had a loud discussion with Ms. Margot. He signed the paper, and he looked at his mother, Mrs. Ada, and he said, This is insurance, Ada. This is to stop a Whitaker from eating a Whitaker. He said, I am setting a bear trap in the vault, just in case. The room was silent. A bear trap in the vault. Judge Davis Mayers had heard enough. She held up her hand. This court finds that sufficient preliminary evidence has been presented to meet the standard for an emergency injunction pending a full arbitration, as dictated by the terms of the addendum, which this court now recognizes as validly attested. She looked at the Whitakers. I am issuing an immediate temporary injunction, effective for 90 days. All non-essential distributions, stipends, and discretionary payments from the Whitaker Family Trust and all associated beneficiary accounts are hereby frozen. A full hearing to appoint an independent arbitrator will be set. The hearing is adjourned. The gavel cracked. It was done. Graham looked like he was going to be sick. The tuition, the arrangements, all frozen. Franklin was a statue of granite, unmoving, but I was watching Margot. She was in her chair, her back to me. The room was buzzing. Her lawyers were scrambling, talking in low, furious voices. She thought no one was looking. She had her phone in her lap, hidden by her designer bag. Her thumbs were flying. I was 2 rows back and at an angle. The courtroom was modern, with a large polished glass partition separating the counsel tables from the non-existent gallery. The light hit it perfectly. I could see the reflection of her phone screen. It was a text message. The recipient was J. Kroll. The message was frantic, full of typos. He's frozen us. He froze everything. They know about the lodge. Get the files. All of them. Burn the lodge records now. My hand was perfectly steady. I raised my own phone, angling it as if checking the time. The reflection of her screen was captured perfectly. I hit the button. The screenshot was taken, silently, with the court's order still echoing in the air. The call came from Riley at 2:10 in the morning. Her voice was pure adrenaline, sharp and fast. I have a source. An off-duty deputy out in the county who tracks strange plates. He just logged a visual. Unmarked white utility van. No plates. Leaving the access road to Frost Pines' lodge at 2:04 a.m. It did not stop at the gate. It blew right through it. Margot's text message burned the lodge records now. She had not waited. She had defied a court order 90 minutes after it was issued. Mara, I said, patching her into the call. They are destroying the evidence right now. They are not. Mara's voice came back instantly awake, cold as ice. They are committing a felony. Riley, send the deputy's log and your source's name to my encrypted email. Brooklyn, meet me at the county sheriff's office in 20 minutes. I am calling the judge. I am waking her up and I am turning our preservation order into a search warrant. The drive to the lodge was a high-speed blur through the dark, winding county roads. It was not just me and Mara. We were in the back of a county sheriff's SUV, part of a 2-car detail. Judge Davis Mayers had not been pleased. Contempt of court, executed with this much speed, had moved from a civil matter to a criminal one. We arrived at the gates of Frost Pines Lodge at 3:30 in the morning. The massive iron gates bearing the W insignia were damaged, one side hanging crookedly where the van had clipped it. The lodge itself was dark. A massive, silent shadow of log and stone against the stars. The deputies fanned out, their flashlights cutting sharp, white beams into the darkness. Elias Thorne, the lodge manager, was waiting on the porch, wrapped in a heavy coat, his face a mask of fear. Mara had called him on the way up. They had a key, he said, his voice shaking. I heard the engine, but by the time I got my boots on, they were gone. The alarm in the gun room is tripped. Show us, the lead deputy commanded. Thorne led us through the cold, cavernous main hall, past the heads of animals I had never seen, their glass eyes reflecting our flashlight beams. He unlocked a heavy oak door, the gun room. It smelled of oil, leather, and something else, the sharp chemical tang I now knew so well. Camphor, mothballs. The room was pristine, lined with locked glass cabinets holding dozens of rifles and shotguns, all gleaming. But in the corner, a massive walk-in safe, its thick steel door heavy as a bank vault, stood open. The interior was dark. One of the deputies shone a high-powered beam inside. It was almost empty, a few stacks of papers, some velvet-lined boxes, but the main central shelf was bare. That's where he kept it, Thorne whispered. The leather satchel with the addendum. Riley was already moving. She ignored the safe. She went straight to the small, discreet security panel on the wall. She popped the cover. The hard drive is gone, she said, her voice tight. The main DVR. They knew what they were doing. Is it over? I asked, the first hint of failure tasting like acid. Riley looked at me and grinned, her flashlight beam illuminating her face from below. Amateurs, she said. They took the local drive. They always forget the backup. Mr. Thorne, where is the main electrical closet? The one for the whole lodge. He led us down to the basement to a cold, concrete room smelling of dust and ozone, filled with humming circuit breakers. In the corner, behind a panel marked telecom, was a second, identical DVR. It was still recording, its little green light blinking steadily. They cut the feed to the main box, but the backup here records from a separate stream. Riley said, her fingers flying as she plugged her laptop into the unit. They would have had to kill the power to the entire mountain to stop this one. We huddled around the laptop screen. The deputies, Mara, Thorne, and me. Riley spooled back the footage. Timestamp. 2:01 a.m., she said. The gun room illuminated in the grainy infrared green of the night vision camera. The safe door was already open. A figure dressed in dark clothes, a baseball cap pulled low, was frantically pulling items from the safe. The figure turned just for a second to look at the open door, as if listening. It was a young man, his face pale with panic. I recognized him instantly. J. Kroll, the name from Margot's text. He was one of her executive assistants, a young man I had seen in the background of family photos carrying her briefcase. That's him, I said. The lead deputy nodded grimly. We watched as Kroll's eyes scanned the safe. He seemed to be looking for something specific. He pulled out a large, leather-bound folder. He threw it on the desk. He pulled out a second, identical folder. He hesitated, looking between the two. On the desk, clearly visible, was Franklin's signature fountain pen, the one with the thick silver cap, lying next to an open, half-empty bottle of whiskey. Franklin had been here just before. Had he been drinking? Had he been celebrating or preparing Kroll? In his panic, he grabbed the second folder, the one that was clearly marked, even in the infrared, with a single, bold Greek letter. He tucked it under his arm, grabbed the DVR from the wall, and ran out of the room. He had left the safe wide open. He had left the other file, and he had left the pen. He was in a hurry, the deputy said. He got sloppy. He was supposed to destroy the evidence, Mara said. But he was working from a frantic text message. He was not precise. We went back up to the gun room. The deputies began a formal search. The folder Kroll had left behind, the one he had discarded, was still on the desk. The deputy handled it with gloved hands. This is evidence, he said. He opened it. Inside was a stack of papers. On top was a sheet of heavy, cream-colored bond. It was titled Addendum Draft Version 4. It was a draft of the clause. Underneath it was a second document, thinner, with a blue notarized seal and a ribbon. It was a completely different addendum, dated 2 years before the Delta signing. It was titled Addendum B, Philanthropic Reallocation. I looked at Mara. She was reading it upside down, her eyes wide. My God, she whispered. This draft references Addendum B. This strengthens the timeline. This proves he was working on the Delta concept for years. This notarized document establishes the legal framework he built it on. Kroll. He took the final signed document, but he left the entire legislative history. The deputy was already on his radio. We have a positive ID on the suspect. J. Kroll. Probable cause for theft, breaking and entering, and tampering with evidence in a felony investigation. The smell of camphor was overwhelming. It was the same smell as the blanket. This was its home. The deputies had dusted for prints, and were now logging the remaining contents. I just looked. The central shelf was empty, but underneath it, in the well of the safe, was a tray designed for holding coins or small items. It was pushed to the back, in the shadow. Something was under it. A single, folded piece of stationery. It was not the thick bond of the addendums. It was Franklin's personal monogrammed stationery. "Deputy," I said. He came over with a gloved hand. He retrieved it. He unfolded it. It was a letter. It was not addressed to anyone. It was handwritten in that same familiar ink from the fountain pen that was still on the desk. It was not a legal document. It was a confession or a testament. It read, "They are my blood, but they are flawed. They are weak. They are consumed by the very thing that built this house. If this vault is ever opened, if the bear trap is ever sprung, it means the family has failed. If the one who springs it has come with clean hands, with proof, and with cause, then so be it. Let the rules stand. Let the arbitrator, not my blood, decide. Let the house be cleansed." He had not been drinking in celebration. He had been writing his own epitaph. He knew we were coming. He had left the pen. He had left the whiskey. And he had left this letter, knowing that whoever came for the Delta file would be too panicked to look under the tray. He was testing me. He was testing his own family. And they had failed. The sun was coming up as we drove back down the mountain. The adrenaline was fading, replaced by a cold, hard certainty. My phone, which had been silent, buzzed. It was an alert from Riley, a local aggressive financial blogger, had just posted a story. Whitaker trusts frozen by court order. Source alleges internal family warfare and misuse of funds. Whitaker Transcontinental stock is halted pre-market. Someone had leaked it. Or perhaps Mara had. My phone buzzed again almost immediately. It was not a text, it was a call. The caller ID read Whitaker. I looked at the screen. I let it ring once, then I answered, my thumb hovering over the record icon on my call screen. "Hello, Graham." His voice was a raw, panicked whisper. It was the sound of a man who had just seen his bank account balance turn to zeros. "Brooklyn, Brooklyn, my God, what have you done?" They cut it off. They cut everything off. Celeste's tuition. My everything. It is all frozen. You have to stop this. This is insane. It is a mistake. Call them off. Call your lawyers off. We can fix this. I can fix this. I will make it up to you. Whatever you want. An arrangement. It was all there. The panic, the confession, the bribe, the final, pathetic gasps of a man who only understood leverage when it was crushing his throat. I said nothing. I let the silence stretch, letting the recorder capture his desperate, ragged breathing. "Please, Brooklyn," he whispered. "I am your father." "I have your statement, Graham," I said, and I hung up. I saved the recording. I labeled it Exhibit F. The summons came from Bellows, the granite-faced lawyer. It was not a court order, it was a request, an invitation. Mr. Franklin Whitaker requests the honor of my presence, alone. The location was the family estate, a place I had not set foot in since I was 5 years old. Not the main house, but the private rose greenhouse. A different kind of security guard, one who looked less like a bodyguard and more like a diplomat, met me at the gate. He escorted me in a silent electric cart through acres of manicured, winter sleeping gardens. The greenhouse was a vast Victorian dome of glass and white steel, a bubble of artificial life in the cold. I stepped inside. The air was a shock, thick, humid, and heavy, smelling of damp earth, fertilizer, and the cloying, aggressive perfume of 1,000 roses. It was an environment of forced, unnatural growth. Franklin was alone. He was not wearing a suit, he was in a simple cashmere sweater and slacks. He was tending to a row of pale yellow orchids. His back to me, he was meticulously tying one of the delicate stems to a small wooden stake. His hands, for the first time, looked old. They are finicky, he said, not turning around. They require perfect conditions. Too much light, they burn. Too much water. They rot. He tied a final, gentle knot. You were never an orchid, were you, Brooklyn? He turned. His face was not angry. It was not defeated. It was appraising, like a scientist studying a new, unexpected element. That day at the funeral, he began walking toward me on the stone path, the blanket, the offer, it was a test. I know, I said. No, you do not. He snapped, a flash of the old fire returning. You think it was a simple bribe. It was not. It was a probe. I wanted to see what you were made of. I wanted to see if 30 years of distance had made you weak, or if it had made you soft. If you would melt for a little warmth, for a few thousand. He gestured to the roses. Graham, Margot, they are hothouse flowers. They are weak. They have been rotted by entitlement. I let them test you, as you call it. I let them run their little pathetic schemes. They have been rotted by entitlement. I let them test you, as you call it. I let them run their little pathetic schemes. I let them hire their narrative spinners and their quack doctors. I wanted to see if you would break, or if you would bend, or if you would come to me, begging. He smiled, a thin, cold approximation of warmth. You did none of them. You came with a battering ram. You came with my own words as a weapon. You are not weak. You are a Whittaker more than they are. It was the closest I would ever get to a compliment. It was also the most profound confession. He had known. He had watched them use the family trust as a weapon against me, and he had done nothing, just to see what would happen. It was a game, a test of bloodlines. This is not a game, Franklin, I said. And this is not about strength. I am a surgeon. When I see a sickness, I diagnose it. When I see a rule, I follow it. You are confusing ethics with weakness. I want the rules to win, not because it is strong, but because it is right. You are angry because your own children trample your rules, and I am the only one who bothered to read them. He stared at me, the humidity beating on his forehead. Right, he said, as if tasting a foreign word, a novel concept in this house. He sighed a long, rattling breath, and the patriarch returned. The pragmatist. The court order is an embarrassment. The asset freeze is untenable. The press leaks are damaging the stock. J. Kroll was arrested this morning, and he is predictably singing like a canary. This ends now. I agree, I said. Good. He walked to a small iron bench. Then let us settle this in-house, the Whittaker way. You drop this invocation. You call off your lawyers. You agree to let the arbitrator's hearing be dismissed. In exchange for what? I asked. In exchange for what you have earned, he leaned forward. The Whittaker Medical Fund. It is one of our largest charitable arms. Billions in assets. It funds hospitals, research grants, scholarships. Right now, it is managed by a committee of fools who report to Margot. She has been using it as a social ladder. He held out his hand. It is yours. I will install you as the sole executive director. A salary of, let us say, 7 figures, full autonomy. You can build whatever you want, fund whatever you want. You can be the good Whittaker, the one who heals people. You can take your surgeon's precision and apply it to the one part of this family that actually does some good. It is a bigger prize than anything you would get from this lawsuit. It is power. Real power. All you have to do is sign one piece of paper, and this entire ugly mess goes away before the arbitration hearing. It was the perfect offer. It was the blanket reborn as an empire. He was offering me a kingdom built on the very foundation of my life's work. He was offering me a way to be right and to be rich. No, I said. Franklin looked at me as if I had just slapped him. No. What do you mean, no? That is the best offer you will ever get. It is my final offer. I am not here to negotiate, Franklin. I am here to see a process through. I do not want the medical fund. I took a step closer. I want the independent arbitrator, as stipulated, and I want a full, third-party forensic audit of the entire Whitaker Family Trust and all its subsidiary holdings, going back 10 years. The color drained from his face. An audit? A third-party audit? You said you wanted to know who was weak, who was rotten. An audit will show you. It will show you every dollar Margot funneled to her consultants. It will show you every arrangement Graham made. It will show you everything. You called me a surgeon. Very well. This is the operation. We are excising the tumor. All of it. You are insane, he whispered. You would burn the whole house down just to prove a point. No, I said. You wrote the rules to save the house from burning. I am simply holding the fire extinguisher. Before he could answer, the glass door of the greenhouse hissed open. Margot was standing there, her face a mask of pale, sweating rage. She was holding a file. She is a hypocrite. Margot shouted, her voice echoing in the humid air, startling a small bird in a cage. She is a liar. You think she is so clean. You think she is the one who read the rules. She is the worst of all of us. She marched down the path, shoving past a priceless orchid, causing its petals to rain on the floor. She has been a corporate player from the beginning, Margot hissed, pointing a shaking finger at me. You want to talk about dirty money, Brooklyn. You want to talk about arrangements. What about your arrangement? Franklin looked at the file, then at me. She took money, Margot said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial venom. All through medical school, while she was pretending to be a pauper, working in the cafeteria, she was taking secret tuition funding, thousands and thousands of dollars paid in cash from an anonymous donor. Sound familiar? She is a paid agent, probably for one of our competitors. She is a fraud. Franklin looked at me. The scales, the moral balance, were tipping again. This was a new variable. Brooklyn, he asked, his voice now dangerously cold, is that your accusation? That I am a hypocrite? That my hands are not clean? Yes, she screamed. You are a paid, lying hypocrite. That is a testable hypothesis, I said. I reached into my own slender portfolio. I pulled out a single laminated sheet of paper. This, I said, handing it to Franklin, is a full audited financial statement of my life from age 18 to the present day, prepared by Riley Park, who, as you know, is a data forensics expert, and countersigned by a certified forensic accountant. Franklin took the sheet. It was a flowchart. You are correct, Margot, I said. I did not pay for my entire medical degree. I received the Provincial Merit Scholarship for high-achieving STEM students for 4 straight years. The amounts are listed right there. It is a matter of public record. I pointed to the next box on the chart. I also took out $42,000 in federal student loans. The loan origination documents are there, and the final paid-in-full receipt dated 3 years ago is there. I pointed to the final box. And the rest, the $24,350, that was paid by me. It was income. You will see the corresponding pay stubs from my work-study job as a biology lab assistant, my night job as an orderly at Riverton General, and my 3 summers spent working, ironically, as a data entry temp for a logistics firm. It is all there. Every single cent is accounted for, documented, and sourced. Margot's face crumpled. She grabbed the paper from her father, her eyes scanning it wildly, looking for the lie, for the loophole. There was none. It was just a cold, grey, boring sheet of facts. I looked at Franklin. My hands are clean. I made sure they were, because I knew one day I would be standing here, and you would need to be sure. I did not come here to get anything. I came here with receipts. Franklin was silent. He looked at his daughter, who was now just a panicked, defeated woman clutching a useless file. He looked at me, holding my single, perfect, irrefutable piece of paper. The scales had tipped. The character score, as he would have put it, was final. He knew. He knew exactly who had been eating the family and who had been paying her own way. He sank down onto the bench. He looked old. He looked tired. He looked at the exotic, forced bloom flowers all around him, and he seemed to realize he was in a cage. Family, he whispered, not to me, but to the humid air. Family is family. It was his last defense, the final meaningless shield of the patriarch. The appeal to a bond that he himself had broken, that Graham had ignored, that Margot had weaponized. Family is not above the laws family itself creates. You wrote the law. It is time for your family to follow it. The 90-day freeze was not a pause, it was a surgical field. Judge Davis Mayers, infuriated by Margot's blatant contempt of court, had granted Mara's motion to install a temporary financial monitor while we awaited the formal arbitration hearing. This monitor was not a friend of the family, he was a ruthless, independent forensic accountant, and he had begun to dig. The first report landed on Mara's desk like a brick. It was just a preliminary finding, but it was devastating. The monitor had been tracing the miscellaneous consulting payments. He found the North Peak invoices. He found the payments to Dr. Vane. But then he found something else. A steady 6-figure bleed. Monthly transfers marked as logistical consulting to a shell company I had never heard of, Mark Rest Holdings LLC. Riley Park had the answer in less than an hour. Mark Rest Holdings was registered in Delaware. Its registered agent was a generic firm, but its funding address, the one on its initial incorporation documents, was a small private mailbox in a Riverton suburb, a mailbox that, until 6 months ago, had been rented by none other than my father, Graham Whitaker. He was not just funding his daughter's PhD, he was systematically siphoning money from the family trust into his own pocket under the guise of consulting fees. The bear trap Franklin had set for intrafamily warfare had just caught its first bear. The second domino fell 2 days later. North Peak Strategies, the reputation assassination firm, was not stupid. They were rats, and they knew a sinking ship when they saw one. More to the point, they knew that their own contract, paid for by trust funds now under judicial review, was evidence in a criminal investigation of Kroll's, and a massive civil suit mine. A formal notice was filed with the court and delivered to the Whitaker lawyers. North Peak Strategies was terminating its contract with the Whitaker family, effective immediately, citing fundamental client ethical violations and misrepresentation of services. It was a masterpiece of corporate self-preservation. They were publicly declaring us unethical, painting themselves as the victims. The story leaked to the same financial blogger by noon. Whitaker's DC fixers cut ties, allege ethical violations, the headline screamed. The fire was no longer contained. The third domino was J. Kroll, Margot's assistant. He was facing multiple felony charges, breaking and entering, evidence tampering, contempt of court. His high-powered lawyer, likely not paid for by the frozen Whittaker accounts, had clearly advised him he had one play, cooperation. He signed a 40-page sworn affidavit. It was a complete, detailed confession of his employment under Margot. It described in excruciating detail her obsession with me. It included transcripts of meetings where she and Dr. Elias Vane planned the cognitive assessment. It detailed her instructions to build a file that would paint me as unstable, paranoid, and litigious. And it confirmed, under penalty of perjury, that the text message I had screenshot, burned the lodge records now, was from her, and that she had personally given him the keys to the lodge and the code to the gun room safe. The final piece of the foundation was laid, not by an accountant or a lawyer, but by Elias Thorne, the old lodge manager. After his testimony, he had gone back to his small cottage on the estate, packed his things, and resigned. On his way out, he had dropped a package at Mara's office. It was the original lodge guest logbook from 12 years ago. It was a thick, leather-bound volume. On the date of October 3rd, the day of the signing, there were only 4 names, all in Mr. Thorne's neat, looping script. Franklin Whittaker, Alastair Finch, Chief Counsel, Elias Thorne, Manager, Ada Whittaker, Matriarch. It was the final, indisputable proof. It confirmed the meeting. It confirmed the attendees. It confirmed the 2 witnesses. It was an official, contemporaneous business record that corroborated his testimony perfectly. Mara arranged a final pre-arbitration conference in the judge's chambers. It was not a hearing. It was a settlement conference, a last chance for the Whittakers to surrender before the war went nuclear. I sat with Mara. On the other side of the table sat Franklin, his face carved from ice, Bellows beside him, and a very pale, very quiet Graham and Margot. Mara did not grandstand. She simply laid out the evidence piece by piece on the polished table. First, she said, we have the preliminary monitor's report identifying Markrest Holdings LLC, a shell corporation directly linked to Mr. Graham Whittaker. Graham flinched as if struck. Son, she continued, we have the notice of termination from North Peak Strategies, who are now, I might add, fully cooperating with our discovery requests to avoid litigation. Third, she said, placing a thick document on the table, the sworn affidavit of Mr. J. Kroll, detailing a multi-year, premeditated campaign of defamation and psychological warfare, directed by Ms. Margot Whittaker. Margot stared at the document, as if it were a snake. And fourth, Mara said, placing another document on the table, the Frost Pines Lodge logbook confirming the presence of Mrs. Ada Whittaker as the primary witness to the addendum's execution. She steepled her fingers. The arbitration is set. We will win. The 18-month freeze will be confirmed. The independent audit will proceed. The findings will be made public. Mr. Kroll's affidavit will be unsealed. The Markrest findings will be turned over to the IIS and the district attorney. This is now a multi-front, catastrophic failure for your family. Mr. Whittaker, Bellows, the lawyer, tried to speak, but Franklin waved him into silence. He was trapped. His face was a mask of cold calculation. He knew his options. Option 1, he could surrender. He could agree to the independent arbitrator, agree to the full third-party audit, and let the chips fall. This would mean ruin for his children, but it would fulfill the letter of his own law. It would be a cleansing of the house, as his own letter stated. Option 2, he could fight. He could order Bellows to file motions to appeal the injunction, to declare the addendum void, but this would be a public declaration of war against his own, attested document. It would confirm to the judge and the world that he was violating his own charter. It would guarantee that the judge confirmed the full 18-month freeze, diverting hundreds of millions of dollars into Ada's charitable fund, a loss of control he could not stomach, and he would likely lose anyway. He was trapped by his own bear trap. There must be another way, Graham muttered, his voice. Father, we can sell the private stock, the T5 holdings. It is not tied to the trust. We can bypass this. We can fund our needs until this is settled. Bellows looked at his client's son with open contempt. Mr. Whitaker, if you attempt a private, unscheduled sale of T5 stock while the family trust is under judicial freeze and the company is under a halt order, the SEC will be in your office within the hour. It would be a blatant criminal signal of insider panic and an attempt to bypass a federal court order. You would go to jail. Graham shrank in his chair. Franklin just stared at the wall over my head. I followed his gaze. Bellows had brought in several items from the museum exhibit to be entered as evidence on a side table, waiting to be tagged. Was the dark grey cashmere blanket. He stared at it. I could almost see the memory playing in his mind, the cold wind of the funeral, the feel of the heavy, sealed document in his hands in the gun room, the sharp chemical smell of camphor that tied the two moments together, the blanket he had offered as a bribe, the addendum he had signed as a failsafe. He understood the clock had run out. I reached into my own portfolio. It was my turn. This is not about money, I said, my voice cutting through the silence. It is not about stock or jail time. It is about cause and effect. You asked me at the museum if I had a ghost story. I do not. I have a timeline. I placed my final exhibit on the table. It was a single, large laminated chart. It was a medical history. On this date, I said, pointing, I received the Provincial Merit Scholarship. 2 days later, a call was logged from Margot's office to Dr. Elias Vane. On this date, I graduated from medical school. 3 days later, the first payment was made from the trust to North Peak Strategies. I traced the line with my finger. On this date, I published my first paper in a major cardiac journal. The very next day, the Gold Digger narrative memo was generated. On this date, I saved Arthur's life. The same week, Graham created Mark Rest Holdings. This was never a test, Franklin, I said, looking him in the eye. This was a coordinated, financially backed, multi-year campaign to discredit me, to isolate me, and to build a case that I was mentally unfit. All designed to ensure that when Ada died, I would have no standing to claim a single solitary thing. I pointed to Graham. He was not diverting funds. He was stealing them. Terrified I would expose him. I pointed to Margot. She was not testing me. She was committing fraud, attempting to build a false psychiatric record to have me disinherited. The room was silent. The two of them, Graham and Margot, were finally exposed, not just to their father, but to each other. He did what? Margot whispered, looking at Graham. Mark Rest. You were stealing. Me? Graham sputtered, pointing a shaking finger back at her. You tried to have her committed. You hired North Peak. You brought this all on us. If you had just left her alone. You told me North Peak was a good idea, Margot shrieked. You said we had to manage the narrative. I did not say, I did not mean. Bellows, tell them this is North Peak's fault. They went rogue. Stop. Franklin's voice was not a shout. He did what? Margot whispered, looking at Graham. Mark Rest. You were stealing. Me? Graham sputtered, pointing a shaking finger back at her. You tried to have her committed. You hired North Peak. You brought this all on us. If you had just left her alone. You told me North Peak was a good idea, Margot shrieked. You said we had to manage the narrative. I did not say, I did not mean, Bellows, tell them this is North Peak's fault. They went rogue. Stop. Franklin's voice was not a shout. It was a low, dead command. The room fell silent. He looked at his two children, his house flowers, now withered and rotting before his eyes. He looked at the evidence. He looked at my timeline. He had his audit, the one I had just delivered. He stood up. He looked at Judge Davis Mayers. This conference is over. He then turned to me. The calculation was gone. His face was just empty. My library, he said, before the hearing, 10 final minutes alone. The library was the heart of the estate, and the heart was black. It was not a room for reading, it was a room for intimidation. 2 stories of floor-to-ceiling ebonyized wood, filled with books that had never been opened. The air was cold, still, and smelled of old leather and furniture polish. On the massive, dark mahogany desk in the center of the room, 3 items were arranged as if for a sacrificial ritual. In the center was the open, heavy, bonded addendum. The 2 witness signatures, Ada Whitaker, Elias Thorne, clear on the attestation page. To the left was the fountain pen, the one with the thick silver cap, resting in an ink-stained groove on its holder, a scar of dried ink. To the right was the dark gray cashmere blanket, folded with perfect military precision. Franklin was standing by the cold fireplace, his back to the empty grate. He was a general surveying a lost battlefield, a field he himself had mined. He turned to me, his face a neutral mask, but his eyes were ancient. He motioned to the desk, to the document. I wrote it, he said, his voice a low rumble. I wrote it to curb the worst of them, the greed, the weakness, the eating. He looked at the names of his children on the trust, then at the title of the addendum. I wrote Delta to chain the parts of the Whitaker bloodline I was ashamed of. He took a long, slow breath. I never, in 1,000 years, thought I would be the one forced to drink the poison. It is not poison, I said, my voice quiet in the vast, dead room. It is medicine. You take bitter medicine to cure a disease. You do not argue with the diagnosis. You accept the treatment. That is medicine, and that is law. He looked at me, a long, searching gaze. The pragmatist, the deal-maker, had one card left to play. It was not a bribe. It was an appeal. And what about forgiveness, he asked. What about family? If I sign this, if I agree to this public execution, this arbitration, this audit, if I burn my own house down to satisfy your rules, will you forgive them? Will you forgive this family? Is there any part of this that ends for you? He was asking, in his own way, if I was human, if I had a price that was not money but emotion. He was asking if I could be satisfied. I am not here to punish, Franklin, I said. I am not here to forgive. Forgiveness is a personal transaction. It is not a legal principle. It is not a clause. I am here to activate the rules that you created and that you promised your mother you would respect. This is not about my feelings. This is about your signature. I was not a person in this room. I was a function. I was the invocation. The heavy library door opened, breaking the stillness. It was Bellows. He was sweating. He did not look at me. Mr. Whitaker, sir, he said, his voice strained. The arbitrator is in the conference room. Judge Davis Mayers is with her. They are ready. And sir, the media, a satellite truck from the Financial News Network is at the front gate. They are live. They are reporting on the stock halt and the freeze. They are waiting for a statement. The world was at the door. The private, internal war was over. The public reckoning was beginning. Franklin looked at his lawyer. He looked at the open document on his desk. He looked at the blanket. He looked at me. His shoulders, for the first time in his life, seemed to slump. He walked to the desk. He did not hesitate. He did not curse. He was a man signing a freight manifest. He was a man completing a transaction. He picked up the fountain pen. He uncapped it. And he signed his name on the line of the document Bellows had prepared. The document that stated he would not contest the invocation. The document that officially accepted the immediate appointment of the independent arbitrator and authorized the full third-party forensic audit, as stipulated by Addendum Delta. His signature was strong, unwavering. He was, if nothing else, a man who understood when the game was lost. The moment the pen lifted from the paper, the library doors burst open. It was Margot. Her face was a grotesque mask of tears and rage. Her hair was wild. "No," she shrieked, running into the room, past Bellows. "Father, you cannot. You cannot let her. It is our money. It is our family. You cannot just sign it away." Bellows stepped forward. "Ms. Whittaker, it is done." "It is not done," she screamed, lunging for the desk, for the paper. "It is done," the voice came from the doorway. It was not Bellows. It was Judge Davis Mayers, standing there, her face like granite. Beside her was the arbitrator, a small, severe-looking woman with a briefcase. The judge stepped into the room. She looked at the signed paper on the desk. She looked at Margot, who had frozen in her tracks. She looked at Franklin. "Mr. Whittaker," the judge said, "by your signature, you have accepted the court's authority and the immediate empowerment of this arbitrator." She turned to the arbitrator. "Ms. Hayes, you are empowered." The arbitrator, Ms. Hayes, stepped forward and rapped her briefcase on the mahogany desk. It was a sound as loud and final as a gavel. "By the authority vested in me by the court, and by the terms of Addendum Delta, Ms. Hayes said, her voice cutting through the air, "I declare the following effective immediately. 1. The 18-month asset freeze is confirmed. All non-essential lines of credit, stipends, and discretionary spending for all beneficiaries are blocked. 2. The order for a full forensic audit is executed. All financial records of the Whittaker Trust, its holdings, and its beneficiaries are to be turned over. 3. The affidavit of Mr. J. Kroll and all associated evidence of the North Peak Strategies contract are to be transferred to the District Attorney's Office for review. 4. The findings regarding Markrest Holdings are to be transferred to the Internal Revenue Service and the State Civil Investigations Unit." It was a systematic execution, the sound of a machine, a set of rules, finally, perfectly engaging. Margot made a small, broken sound like an animal. Graham, who had been hiding in the hall behind Bellows, was openly weeping. Franklin did not move. He just watched me. I walked to the desk. I did not look at the document. I looked at the dark grey cashmere blanket. Franklin turned to me as if to speak. His mouth opened. He wanted to say my name. He wanted one last word. I did not let him. I reached out and picked up the blanket. I folded it, just as I had in the museum. Neatly, precisely, clinically. I turned and placed the folded blanket on the dark leather of an empty reading chair. I nodded once to my grandfather. "You gave me warmth, Franklin," I said. "Now it is time to let your own laws keep this family warm." I turned my back on him. I turned my back on my weeping father and my broken aunt. I walked past the judge. I walked past the arbitrator, who was already on her phone, issuing her first orders. I walked out of the black heart of that library. And as I crossed the threshold into the hallway, I heard the sound from behind me one last time, as the arbitrator brought her hand down on the desk to emphasize a point. The final, decisive sound, the sound of the gavel falling, the sound of the knot being tied, the sound of the rules winning.